I am Grady Colaine in the CapeCod.com News Center here for a special segment. We're talking about the upcoming project for Maurice's Campground in Wellfleet. We're here with Studio G Architects. Gail Sullivan, you are the principal, managing principal, I believe, is the official title.
Yes.
You're a returning face, and you guys have just wrapped up the most recent public meeting to hear a little bit more about what residents have what they'd like to see in store for that location. Do you mind kind of talking a little bit more about how the public outreach process has gone so far and what you've been learning from this most recent meeting?
Yeah, a lot. So I think I'll start with kind of how many people have participated. So we had counted until last night, it was 220 people. Last night, we estimate we had about 90 people in the room. It was a really full center at the Adult Community Center, and there were another 30 in a Zoom room with a few of our team members conducting a parallel conversation for them. So their small group was a Zoom group, not so small. So it was really energetic, very exciting to see so many people interested. I'm still kind of high from that. So that was great.
Yeah, I mean, that's some great turnout. I'm glad you guys are able to
Yeah,
kind of get that many voices. I'm sure it helps inform a better project, essentially. What
absolutely.
were what was some of the content that you have been bringing to the meeting to show them? Like, what was available to comment on? Can you
Yeah,
share some of the ideas you got back from the
yeah.
public for?
So I think I'll start with, kind of your question about what's been the engagement, because I love people to understand kind of where we are in a process. So I actually forget exactly when we started, but maybe it was around April. Um, and this won't wrap up until March of 2025. So far, people have participated in surveys, online surveys, in community focus groups that were held, some done by our team, but most of them were actually done by other residents of Wellfleet, talking to their friends, their neighbors, business groups, whoever it was, right? So just sort of the organic relationships that exist. And that's the 220 people that I was talking about. So we had, as you know, Grady, an August 1st community meeting. And that was really kind of the brain dump. Tell us all your visions for what you want to have happen here. And we heard so many great ideas, needs for sure, right? The need for housing, the need a lot of people had expressed for some kind of community hub at that site, because South Wellfleet doesn't have a lot that draws people together, except for the cinema, which is very enclosed across the road. So, that chance to bring people together, and we heard big need for seasonal workers. So, in answer to your question, sort of what have we been doing and what things did we show? Those were kind of the three, I'd say three of four key schemes, right? So, year-round housing for people, and people wanted a lot of different kinds. Housing for seasonal workers, and some kind of community commercial space. The Billingsgate Market is already there. People love that it's there. They want to see a bigger Billingsgate Market, more robust. Open space preservation was another thing that I wanted to mention, very important. So, having heard all of that, which were kind of the high themes that we had gotten from all of the other input from August 1st and from everything else, we prepared a number of land use, well, not a number, two land use plans, deliberately different. And they're not meant to be, what are we going to put on this site? Because we are not the designers, we are not the developers, we are the planners for the town. And really important distinction, which I keep reminding everybody of, because we all have to remind ourselves as architects, we love to design things. So we have to pull back and say, it's not going to be our design, right? It's going to be somebody else's design. So last night was all about, here are the ideas. Here's how we've kind of assembled all the things that we've heard from you, these many different ideas. And here are a couple of ways that they might get organized on the site. And then we asked people to give us their feedback on that. And so that was the purpose of last night. And before I get into the detail of that, I'll just sort of talk about the process going forward. So now we've gotten 120 people's feedback with a lot of different points of view, as you might expect. And our job is going to be to cull through all of that and again see what the themes are, see where the, sort of more interest here, more interest there. These folks are not so interested in that. How do we put all of that together, right? This is not going to be you know, we try to build consensus as much as possible. With something like what we're talking about, we're not going to find that everybody is thrilled with everything about a 21-acre site, but trying to go for what are the most important things that have the most support and put those together. And then to your question, what are the next opportunities for people? So we will be doing another community meeting, which is now set actually for March 26th. So I'll make my plug, March 26th, also in the Wellfleet Adult Community Center. And that will be to take it to the next level. And I think it's our job to refine what we've done, but most importantly, to use all that feedback for the ultimate goal of this process, which is to develop a set of guidelines that represents these are the priorities and preferences of citizens of Wellfleet for what happens on this site. And those guidelines become part of a package of a request for proposals that will go out to developers saying, please review these and give us your best proposal that will meet those needs. So ultimately, all of this work we're doing is really driving toward this set of guidelines. But of course, in the process, the point of it is to also try to drive toward building as much consensus in town as possible about what should happen there. So I think there's the process in a nutshell. I do want to say, because this was a question that came up last night, and it's hard for people to picture how long all of this takes, but our planning study is like 10 months long. The committee, the Maurice's Campground Planning Committee, thinks that probably an RFP would go out in 2026, right? So the campground will remain a campground until sometime, I think it's mid-year in 2028,
Hmm.
or maybe it's the end of the season in 2028. I'm not quite sure when, but it is in 2028. Now, in an ideal world, you'd kind of like to have a developer selected by then with a plan so that they could go into construction and start to solve the problems, right? Build some housing and other things. That's pretty optimistic. It may not happen that quickly. And probably what we're talking about, depending on scale, it could take 6 to 10 years. So this is a long range process. And that's part of what I was trying to get people to understand last night, because I think that some people were thinking, oh my God, you're talking about a whole bunch of housing and it's going to be on my doorstep in, a year or two.
Next summer, coming right across the way,
Exactly.
Wellfleet Cinema, a combination
Be-
of affordable housing.
Believe me, I wish the development happened that fast, but it doesn't. So, we identify needs in 1 year, and I'm lucky if I see that thing finished in 5 years. So it really is a long process. It's a long haul, and I hope people will stick with it. So kind of there's the process answer. In terms of what people talked about, not surprisingly, so we showed plans that showed a lot of year-round housing because we heard there's a lot of need. And I won't throw a lot of numbers out, but I will use one. So in the housing production plan that was done in 2023, they identified, and this was done by J.M. Goldson, who is working with us on the community engagement. They identified 495 households in Wellfleet that are cost burdened. Cost burden means these are people who are really struggling just to pay the rent, the mortgage, whatever it is, right? That's a lot, right? There are fewer than 2,000 households in town. So almost 500 is a very high number. And one of the things we've been trying to do in the past several months is to quantify the need. It's very hard. We have a lot of anecdotal information, people who we've interviewed, people who we've met with, who have talked about their needs, about the kind of conditions of some of the housing, whether for year-round folks or for seasonal folks. So the need is clear, but the number of the need is less clear. And it seems to me that part of what we should be doing for people in town is to be able to identify a number and say, here's the target of what the gap is between what we have today and what we need to have. And I can't tell you how many hours my team has spent trying to come up with this. This kind of data is really hard to find. We've gone to the Cape Cod Commission, we've gone to a variety of other sources. It's kind of hard to find. So we settled on the housing production plan's information is kind of the best indicator of need. So if you take that 495 and you say there are 59 affordable housing units in the pipeline right now, 46 at Lawrence Hill, and then there's several other smaller projects, then that leaves you with a need of 400. I'm looking at my number to make sure my
We got to
math's right.
bust out the Texas Instruments calculator. Is going to have to get
Yes,
involved
exactly.
pretty soon.
Or my little piece of paper. Um, 436 households that don't have adequate housing that they can actually afford. So that seems a pretty good indicator of need. I won't say it's a hard number that, 436 people are standing in line somewhere for housing, but it's a pretty good indicator of need. So then part of what the team did is we said, okay, what's going to limit development on this campground site? Is it going to be the environmental concerns of the site because we have a wetland adjacent? The Silver Spring Brook is just north. Yeah, both of these are north of the site between Springbrook Road and the property. Uh, we have a wetland. We have a priority habitat for endangered species. And Springbrook requires a riverfront buffer. So we said, okay, so the buffer, which is the biggest inhibitor, that becomes the limit, right? So now we know what our physical limit is for development. What are the other limits? So we went to the town's engineering consultants for wastewater and for water. And we said, okay, what about the water line that's coming from Eastham? Actually, it's already been installed under the road. So what about the water line? So they said, it can carry, they had made some assumptions. They said, if you put 300 homes on this site, you'd be fine, right? So we said, okay. So that's sort of a rough ceiling, right? And then we said, what about the wastewater, right? Because we have to do a wastewater advanced treatment facility. The plan when the town bought this property is that that would go on this site, but it would serve not only the homes on this site, also the cinema, flea market, and drive-in, also Springbrook Road neighborhood and the Village Lane neighborhood. And all of this is to help resolve the order of conditions on the town regarding nitrogen going into the harbor, right? So we said, okay, and we tried to work out sizing for a system that hasn't been built yet, right? So we said, what are your calculations? What do you think that, what have you planned on? And again, looked at all of that with the engineer, and the conclusion was 750 bedrooms roughly on the property, which, we could average out to about 300 units of different sizes. So then it looked to us roughly like 300 is the cap on this site based on technical issues. And we said, do 300 units fit reasonably on
Hmm.
this site, right? So we
Well,
started testing, right?
yeah, and
And
it sounds like you
it's
might have to compete with potential open space if you wanted to incorporate that
ex
too. So,
exactly. So how do you balance the open space and especially the preservation of the tall trees? Because that site has beautiful tall pines and oaks, right? They really are standout. And you want to hold on to that character, right? And of course, it meets the rail trail at the back, and you want to hold on to the character of that relationship. So, then we just started playing around, right, with different sizes of blocks of units of homes and what can work. So we think that the ceiling is about 300. We think that the low side is probably the 200 trailers that are there today. So I don't know if your listeners all know this. Currently today on the site, there are 200 trailers, most of which stay there year round. The people can't. They can only stay there 6 months of the year, but the trailers are there year round. A lot of them have foundations and patios and porches and a whole bunch of things. It's actually really kind of great.
it's a lovely little village that they've
It is a
managed to put
lovely little
together.
village. And so, we thought, okay, that's probably about where we're looking, somewhere between, more than the 200. up to the 300.
Mhm.
Where that's going to land, I don't know. I will say that last night people had different opinions about that. Some people wanted fewer housing units there. Some people said, great, the more housing, the better. They see a lot of need. Some people's preference was, really, we like a lot of everybody in town. One person said, everybody in town wants to live in a single family house. Well, I'm not sure, you know, nobody has surveyed everybody in town that's looking for a place to live. So there's a question. What do people who need the housing want, and what can they afford? So that's, I think, part of the exploration for the next couple of months is to try to get deeper into those answers. And also, because this is a critical piece, what's the financial feasibility? Because any of us can say what we'd like. I could tell you what I'd like in the world today. That doesn't mean I
Nice
get it.
castle, rustic elk wood. Just make it
Peace,
happen.
peace on earth, a whole
Peace
lot of
on
other
earth.
things, but it doesn't mean I get it today, right? And so we have to test the financial feasibility. And this is part of the work we're doing. And I think I've mentioned this to you before, Grady, but Boston Communities is one of the consultants to us. They are a developer who also acts as a development consultant. And so they've been working really closely with us to figure out how do you finance these different pieces of housing. So if we have some things that are single family or two family, and some that are townhouses that are, party wall, 3, 4, 5 units together. Maybe there are some buildings that are 10 or 12 units, flats above and flats below. Maybe there are apartment buildings that, as many
That's
people
a
will
scary
guess,
word here on
it,
Cape Cod.
it is, it
Apartment
is.
building has been known to ruffle feathers. But
Yeah.
it is interesting.
Yeah.
I assume, and then this is all going to come back to the town to make some decisions on and whatnot. But it's interesting to see the whole kind of methodology that goes into it.
Yeah.
Do you think you're providing a more robust service than maybe some other towns have gotten used to? Do you think that this is kind of the model for how we can try to tackle this affordable housing across the Cape?
I hope so. I hope that I'm not sure that every town has had the wherewithal to have this kind of a robust community process, but to me, this kind of robust community process is it's not like it's a smooth road necessarily, right? There are disagreements, but it's the way that you get something that everybody can say, okay, I like that, but not that so much, but I can live with this. That's where we want to get to, right? So So yeah, I think it is a model. I hope the process is, and I'll say also that there's a lot of conversation in the committee about trying to create a model that the Cape Cod Commission has talked about in their design guidelines, which is look at traditional development patterns, look at compact development. Remember how much we value our village centers. I love Wellfleet Village Center. Everybody else does. But also, Chatham, other towns, right? These lovely centers that people can come together in and meet their neighbors. So we're thinking to have a mini version of that, perhaps at the front of the site, and then housing extending back, and it gets less dense as it goes back, with an idea that Route 6 can handle more building, right? It's Route 6. When you can, you go pretty fast on Route 6, and when you can't, you're aggravated with traffic. So,
You've summed up my entire life living in East Town for almost for 30 years, really.
well, I
But
think it's the experience we all share. So, so I think, looking at the differences on the edges of the site is really important. So, I don't think we're ready to share the plans. I think, we shared them last night, but they just really aren't the plans that are going to be built. I think it's more important that people start to think for themselves. What do they see as the need? What do they see as the needs that ought to get solved on this site, right? Because it's one of the biggest sites that Wellfleet will have to offer. And then how do we go about that? The physical, I think, is actually the easy part. I think getting to an agreement on the what is it that we're going to do, I think that may be the harder part.
Indeed. That's always the more difficult portion, really. In terms of, so on the Outer Cape, this could be shaping up to be one of the denser locations when it comes to living, walkability, like outside of Provincetown. I mean, this might have like ramifications for design for the Outer Cape going into like 30 years from now. Is that something that has been on your mind too? Because I'm immediately
It
thinking of
is.
like Commercial Street, Provincetown is pretty much the only other thing I can really think in terms of meeting the same kind of stuff you're describing. But yeah, just can you just
Yeah.
elaborate for me?
Well, it's funny. Somebody said last night, I can't remember who it was, but somebody said, well, the Cape Cod Commission is saying this now, but 30 years ago they told us that we should have 1 acre zoning. And I started laughing at that because I thought, right, our ideas change. There was a period of time in which I think there was not just on the Cape, but across the state, this kind of suburbanization, almost exurbanization, where like, you can't no more than one unit of housing on
Oh.
an acre of land. That really didn't,
And then you have to
it
drive
didn't,
for 30 minutes to get out of your neighborhood
to
is
go
what
get
kind
a
of,
quarter milk, you
yeah.
drive miles to bring your child to school. This is not sustainable living. It's not particularly healthy living. It's also not very neighborly. When you go into places where there's a whole acre of land before you find the next neighbor, it's not very neighborly. So the question is, what makes sense? And I think the fact is, you want a variety. You want some places, and that's why the village center idea interests me so much, is you want some places that are more compact. You can park your car or your bike, you can get out, you walk around, you do things, and then you move on. And so even on a 21-acre site, you can have that kind of variety from some small scale neighborhoods to some stuff that is denser and yes, maybe is 3 stories tall, right? So I think thinking about the variety, and I think that's a challenge to a lot of people to think, how would that look?
Hmm. All right. Well, Gail, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation,
Sure.
but I'm afraid we're about coming up on time. But I did just want to ask, like, free bingo space. Is there anything else you wanted to highlight for our listeners, either about upcoming events, links that people can check out some of the stuff online, and maybe we'll throw it in the description as well for people who are interested.
Yes,
You can learn
I,
more below as well. But yeah,
I'll
what
send you the
about that?
QR code
Oh, the
because that's
QR
the best
code.
thing.
Whoa.
Yeah.
It might appear right here for all, or right here for all I know. If our video editor Pete is willing to be kind for our good old pal Gail. But yeah, anything else you want to highlight for our listeners as well while we're
No,
here?
no. Thanks
All
so
right.
much.
Yeah, well, stay tuned. It's certainly shaping up to be a very impressive potential village center, and we look forward to seeing where this is going to be taking us in the spring. So thank you very much as well for joining me again for this conversation.
Thanks a lot, Grady.
I'm Grady Colane in the CapeCod.com News Center, and thank you for listening.